Hello and welcome, everyone. You're listening to the 2019 edition of the MLS Fantasy Insider Podcast, our Round 7 episode. First double game week. Yeah, get excited for this stuff, guys. This episode is brought to you by beardcareclub.com. Surprise visit from Lily wants to join in and get the Beard Care Club products as well. Beard Care Club is a U.S.-based veteran-owned company offering facial hair care products and accessories for both men and women, and apparently babies like Lily as well. Check out beardcareclub.com today to find out more. Use code MLSFantasy to get your MLSFI discount as well. Good people out of Real Salt Lake who, or at least fans of Real Salt Lake up there in Utah. So yeah, head over there, check that out, support some great people. I'm your host, Reed Connolly from MLSFantasyBoss.com. And tonight I'm joined by co-host Michael Denton and Blayne Riffle, who may be joined by his daughter Lily at times. We'd also like to welcome our very special guest tonight, Jessup Gage, who was one of our top Patreon donors for the last couple of seasons, and a fellow FC Cincinnati fan. So how is everyone doing tonight?
Doing well.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. The only promise that we're making tonight is that we won't devolve into some sort of hour-long episode of soccer human resources law and jargon, as can happen when Blayne, Jessup, and I talk on Twitter or Facebook about things like that. So none of that will happen tonight.
I think we can derail and we can go to that conversation. Let's not make any promises we can't keep.
There might be a special episode. Right, there may be a Patreon episode there. But what we are here to talk about, guys, is fantasy soccer, and that's what everyone's tuned in for tonight. So we're just going to jump right in, right away, start talking about our Beard Care Club Round 6 review. I know everyone is excited to talk about this incredibly entertaining from a watch soccer point of view, but very frustrating for many fantasy round. Blayne, we'll let you just kick things off on a high note. How did you do?
On a high note, and I got an 80 this week. Not terrible overall. I think I can't tell whether I went up a few spots in the overall ranking or down. Value went up almost another 0.5, so I won't complain there. Captain Paz, that was mediocre. Started Altidore, which worked out really well because I was wavering between him and Zardes in the starting role. But I had Rooney, and that -2 really hurt, especially when the counter to Rooney was Vela, who had another solid week. Probably the biggest highlight I had was grabbing Nani, just taking a flyer on Orlando doing something well, and that's kind of what saved my week there. Everybody else kind of went where I expected them to, and unfortunately I got caught by the SKC rotation at the end. And I had Russell and I had Fontas. I ended up dropping Russell to try to tweak it a little bit. I was trying to catch up in a head-to-head, and I thought, well, if SKC can keep the clean sheet with the subs, I can possibly snag this head-to-head win. It didn't work, but I did bring in Busio, so I got 2 extra points there from Russell. I think I may have lost 2 points total on that, but the guys I had, I think, all gave me a price rise, so I can't complain too much there.
No, you get. I mean, I think 80 is a solid score this round. I saw a few people in the 90s, some people in the hundreds. I think if you were scoring, and anyone listening right now, if you got from 75 or higher, I think you probably had a pretty good game. 75 to the 80s, a good round. Anything in the 90 to 100 plus round, had a fantastic. This was a strange round. I almost went with Nani. I couldn't quite afford him with don't quite have as high a budget as I would hope for at this point. But I did mention Orlando when I was on the United States of Soccer before as a potential. Didn't see that game being that high scoring, but yeah, they pulled that out. That was our Blayne Jessup. Can we call it the MLSFI Derby? Is that okay? Sporting Kansas City versus Cincinnati. I mean, maybe we can get 2 derbies since it's usually me. So we got Cincinnati versus Sporting Kansas City, and then Cincinnati versus New York City FC. Those would be our.
I was about to say, like, we just cut New York City out of, which is fine with me this year.
I mean, I get this is
New York City still has a team.
Apparently,
I mean,
Mike, how did your team go?
How did my team? Oh, my team did great this weekend. Shmee and Pirate Brute teamed up really well to beat Peter Pan at the Jolly Roger, so I was able to beat Ursula in the villainous game I played this weekend. As far as fantasy, not so much. If you listen to my picks last week, some of the good players I had on my team, I traded those players out for bad players. So like I had Francis and Josie on my picks last week, and then I dumped them because there was injury concerns. And then I picked up like Dwyer, who even though Orlando scored 4 goals, he got none of them. I still captained Valeri. He got 1 point, which is I think is the worst captain I've ever had. I don't think I've ever had a captain with 0. Yeah, I had 46. So my season is done. So you were about to hear some really interesting picks from me because I have nothing to lose or gain except for time week. So,
I completely disagree with your pessimism right there. We are getting into a week.
I'm in the 2500s.
We are getting into a series of like 8 weeks. Double game, and that's do not. If you are listening and you are in Mike's situation right now, do not fall for his pessimism. Do not. We are having.
Look, I can still win the extra time weekly prize. That's what I'm.
That's right. You can still win prize. Huge chunk of double game weeks coming up, so don't get discouraged. Don't get discouraged. Jason Sagini beat Mike. He is second in our league right now. It is a vicious head-to-head league. So there's that. For myself,
my son would have beat me. It was not hard.
Well, your son's been beating you all season, though, so that's nothing right there. As for me, I lost to Andrew Wiebe. I will own up to that. I gave him some crap on Twitter. He responded, and I lost 59-82. I had a similar week to Mike. I manipulated my team so that I was able to get both Ladero and. Sorry, I did not have Ladero. I got Valeri on my team. I didn't go with Ladero. I went with Rodriguez instead. So I had Valeri and Rodriguez, and that got me a massive 4 points as Portland continues to self-destruct. I did Captain Paz, so I got 16 there. And then I downgraded De Leon because I needed to get some money to bounce around, and I got Drew Moore instead. So I got 4 points there. But I got Stefan. I had Smith. And then my bench didn't do great with Paxton, Akam, and Garza, who got me a big goose egg right there. So, yeah, pretty poor round. At least I had Josie with the 12. Toronto players did great. So thanks, Older Goaler. You guys did me well right there. But this was such a strange round. Jessup, we already mentioned how Blayne beat you, but is there any other just tell us about your team?
Yeah, so you guys made me feel a lot better. I was
here. That's why I'm here.
We're ending on another high note.
I felt that this was the worst week I could have come on the pod because I played Blayne and he beat me. We're in a homegrown league where we were head to head. I was undefeated, and then just went down. Oh no, I'm sorry. In the homebrew league, I'm still undefeated. Never mind. Sorry, I'm still ahead of you in that one, Blayne.
Yeah.
Invitational League, the Host Invitational League, I was undefeated until this week. Blayne took me down in the head-to-head league. So I was really feeling down. I also felt like pretty much everything that could go wrong with my team did go wrong. But after hearing your guys' stories, I'm feeling a lot better. I had 68 overall. I did a bunch of switcheroos, and all of them at the beginning were just, abysmal. I had Rooney on the bench and a switcheroo, thank goodness, so I could replace him. Medina, I took a flyer on him, 2 points. So I left him on the bench. Brillant for DC United scored 0. I mean, all these guys were really struggling. But I did sub in Will Francis and got that 11. I had De Leon and Brad Smith. So my defenders kind of came through, and that and captaining Pozuelo, that got me to 68. So now I'm feeling a little bit better after hearing some of these other scores.
Yeah, no, Paz was really a decent captain. So I mean, he wasn't a Rossi captain if you went crazy with that. But I mean, he was an okay. Josie did better. Would have got you at 24, but he got 16 points. Paz did, so not awful as far as captains go. Before we get into why this was such a strange round, I just want to wrap this all up and say the highest score this week was 109 points in the head-to-head league, and Ryan Anderson is still at the top. MLS Fantasy Boss contributor, makes the stats articles that everyone really loves. So the Behind the Numbers series, check that out at MLSFantasyBoss.com right now. He is still leading 6-0-0, the only undefeated player left in our round. Very tight, very tight. You guys got to get it together. I'm hoping that this spring league is just the testing the waters, because a lot of those extra time guys are beating us. So we gotta get this together. Maybe we'll try to get Bobby on sometime and see if he wants to talk some smack. And of course, we're going to mention the Patreon League right now. River Schuylkill is still leading that league. The player is Poskinus. I'm sorry, but if you're a Patreon donor and you're upset about me mispronouncing your team names and your name, you have not been a donor long enough. And I'm so sorry. I'm also so sorry. But congrats for doing so great. We got a lot of great stuff for the Patreon with the Beard Care Club products that are coming and the gift cards that get provided as well. So it's a great league. So happy to have Jessup here for that, and everyone who donates. Thank you so much. But now let's talk about why round 6. Just a quick review. Why it was so strange and why so many people, including ourselves, had these weird scores. I'm going to start it out with one of my most surprising fantasy moments, and I don't know what surprised me most. If it was that San Jose put up 3 points against Portland, or that Wando wasn't involved in any of them, because he was on the bench. But that was, I don't think anybody saw. I know that Portland's been struggling. I just don't think anybody saw San Jose dropping 3 points on them. So that was my most surprising fantasy moment right there. What about the rest of you guys?
Well, and for me, it's that same game. It's not that San Jose scored. It's that Portland couldn't score at all. I didn't see San Jose keeping the clean sheet. And we're going to talk in a second about Vega and his price point and why he didn't rise. But, I mean, they've been terrible. I think they let in 2 goals every game before that. And, I mean, I know Portland has struggled, but you would still assume that with Valeri they could put up some goals. That didn't happen. So, I mean, that was pretty much the end of my week there. I don't know what's wrong with Portland. I haven't watched enough of their games, but I mean they're in serious trouble, and I'm not touching them until June when that road trip ends.
Yeah, and we can go ahead and talk about some of the Vega points. That was a question that we had come through Reddit about why didn't he go up, and I think it boils simply down. Mike, feel free to jump in with this. Is that we know that it's a 3-week average. The last fantasy newsletter I had mentioned that, and a player has a certain value set as to what average they need to have over a 3-week with the diminishing points to maintain or increase in value. And he has a lot of bad weeks that simply one game can't quite rub out immediately. Is that a fair breakdown, Mike?
Yeah, and to go into a little bit more detail, James Ballow in the Discord chat of MLSFantasyBoss.com said that when he looked at the numbers, because they asked him why he didn't have a price rise, he said that even though we have a price-based minimum of a player can't go below 4 million, that's not true for the price algorithm. So I think the price algorithm at the moment, even with 14, has him as a $3.5 million player. So unless that raises above 4 million, you're not going to see the price rise. So that's a new piece of information that we didn't have. I'm thankful for him for clarifying that in the chat. So that's huge. Something to keep in mind. So I mean, he said, Vega is going to need a few more 14s to get an actual price rise.
But I'm not upset about that, because I mean that was something we didn't like last year, about how one game could just have such a huge impact on a player's value, and that's
I mean, it may have had a bigger impact if it had happened in week 1 instead of week 5.
Early in the season, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe if he has a few decent performances, it'll shift pretty quick. But yeah, that's something that we found out that we didn't know before.
Well, are we hoping that they're going to play Portland 2 or 3 more times in the next few weeks?
I don't know. When they play New York City, they can't score either. If they play New York City and Atlanta and the Red Bulls, they'll be really fine.
Jessup, what was the surprising moment for you?
Well, I mean, the talking point of the week for me for sure had to be DC and LAFC. Going into this week, early in the week last week, I actually had kind of an exchange with Blayne via social media, and we kind of shared our first draft teams. And I had both Rooney and Vela and switcheroos on the bench. And I was explaining to him that I had so many thoughts about this game and how it could go. And I was so afraid to either drop them or have both of them in the starting lineup. I just didn't know what was going to happen. I finally went with the home team bias and kept Rooney and dropped Vela, and have been kicking myself ever since. I mean, I didn't get to watch the whole game. I was chasing kids, but I was checking the scores and the updates, and just in shock as I'm seeing goal after goal, and then finally the red card on Rooney. So if anybody has some insights who was able to watch that match about, how was it as bad as the scoreline showed with LAFC just dominating DC United away, I'd be interested to hear it. But one thing I've kind of taken away from this is I think Vela is fixture proof. I mean, if he can go away to DC United after they were so strong defensively, go across country like they did and just beat up on him 4-0, Vela is really hard not to have in your lineup every week.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely. I mean, I think that was the big conundrum that a lot of fantasy players found themselves in, and I can understand not going with any of these players. And I think if you made that choice, you shouldn't be kicking yourself too much. I mean, you had this almost impenetrable, unmovable object going up against just this massive goal-scoring force, but they had to come across the country. DC's home turf, which has been doing so well. And we even said, I mean, this could be a 0-0 or a 3-3. I just don't think we expected all those goals to be on for one team, though. And that was just what was so crazy. And you're right, exactly. A huge credit to what Bob Bradley and Vela and everyone's doing there. Rossi was still the player of the day. So, I mean, Vela may be fixture-proof, but he's not always going to be the number one guy. And that's probably because they were all over Vela. I haven't got a chance to watch it either, and this fast turnaround is going to be hard for doing that. But if you leave others open, there's still people who can score on that team. So, yeah, LAFC is a beast. Blayne, what do you got?
Sorry, unmute here because I got Lily with me again. One of those weird ones, because I was really high on them before the season started, and that's RSL. With the form they've been in, with the way they have been playing lately, you would expect Seattle to drop 2 or 3 on them at least. And I know this was without Rui Diaz, but RSL, when they're not losing their head and getting red cards, they can compete with the top teams in the West. They showed that this week, even without Krylock in the lineup. They played pretty well. I mean, they kept that game close on the road in Seattle, and just they're one of those teams that going forward, as long as they can keep their guys on the field, they'll be fine.
Yeah, those were the 3 surprising games that I had on my list. And we mentioned last week how we thought RSL had a little bit more credit due for what they were able to withstand. And so this was just another example of that. I don't think RSL needs to be included in our garbage team list as quickly as some people may be willing to do that. Rui Diaz being gone, a huge element to it, but Ladero did struggle a little bit for the last couple of games. So I think that's why a lot of us went with Rodriguez instead of Ladero, trying to see if that was going to be a different shift. So it didn't happen, but not much happened in general right there. Okay, those are some prizes. What about important fantasy takeaways? If you got another surprise, Mike, throw it out.
Well, one more is Red Bulls losing at home to Minnesota without Quintero. I mean, both of the New York teams are at the bottom. I ranted about New York City, but I mean, it's probably time to start hitting the panic button on the other side of the Hudson. That's a really bad result for a team that prides itself on defense. I mean, because I switched from Francis to the Red Bulls because I'm like, no Quintero, that's an easy goal. I almost thought about bringing more Red Bulls players, and I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, my wife and I are going to try to go to that game for FC Cincinnati, and I was like, that could be a good game because they've got some history, but they're playing bad, so we might win.
And that was actually on my list too about New York Red Bulls, but they have this. They lost their coach last year, but other than that, they're playing the same system for the most part, and they have most of the same personnel. I mean, anybody have any thoughts on what's going on in New York?
So, maybe Blayne can chip in too, but I heard an interview with Peter Vermees this week on Extra Time, and they talked about how Sporting Kansas City used to be the huge pressing team and that he shifted away from that, and they were asking him why. And he just said that you have to do that. You have to change your tactics up because this league can't adapt to that. And I think that may be some of what we're seeing here with the Red Bulls is this is what they've always done. This is what they've done for 3 years, and people have figured it out, and they know what to do. And other teams have gotten some better pieces to help exploit the cracks that could happen.
I mean, I'll take the Red Bull fan side here, and what I've been hearing on social media is it's Tyler Adams.
Night, Daddy. Night, Daddy.
Night, everybody. Lily's going to bed. So what I was saying, Red Bulls fans will tell you it's the loss of Tyler Adams. Mm-hmm. He covered that defense. He was kind of the rock in the midfield. You could expect him to be everywhere. He kind of took the old Dax McCarty role and made it his own. And he really kind of glued that whole team together, and they haven't found a suitable replacement for him yet. Now, I don't know if that's exactly accurate. I think that maybe Red Bulls fans talking up their player a little bit more. But again, look what he's doing in the Bundesliga. I mean, he's over there. He's making an impact already. I mean, you can't just replace somebody like that. Same thing that's going on with New York City. They lost Villa. They've got they don't have that. Yeah, Atlanta as well.
Villa, I wish.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think for the Red Bulls, something I'll add is I think Jesse Marsch was a little bit undervalued as a coach, and I hate the fact that I happen to praise him. This is just gross. But I mean, I think he was a really good motivator. And if you're playing a press, you need to be high energy. And I mean, Chris Arnott has kind of kept that up. But I mean, right now you have Kaku openly tweeting about how he wants to leave. I just don't think you have that same energy in the locker room and motivation to go out and do that high energy, high press game every now and then. Jesse Marsch can kind of keep it up, in part because he also had Tyler Adams, who was there, who's young, hungry, eager to prove his chance to go to Europe. That's not there, So I think that's something that they're going to have to deal with in the summer, and to get him out of the locker room, and you may have that improve a little bit.
All right, let's move on to important fantasy takeaways. I'm going to start this one off. We're going to talk about Vancouver LAFC right there. Sorry, Vancouver LA Galaxy. Apologies, Matt Pollard. Right off the top. And that blown PK for Vancouver, and I love that video. How the shot's taken, gets saved, and the player just turns around and runs. So it's like, my bad. That was my bad. I'm so sorry. But I want to point out, this is the fancy takeaway. Zlatan is fantastic. I like him for this week, but his last 3 goals have all been from PKs and not from open play. He's got that 1 assist in this last round, but I don't know if that's exactly what you want from your DP. He's getting goals. So overall, I guess that's what you do want. But I just think it's important to consider for fantasy that with some of these away games or maybe the tougher matches, I don't know if Zlatan is as fixture-proof or must have all the time as maybe he was last year. Because, again, 3 PKs, that's not always going to happen.
But he drew 2 of those himself, or did he draw all 3?
I don't know. At least the one did he get the one? I don't think he got the one in Vancouver. That was on somebody else.
Okay.
Well, something we should probably also mention is the fact that he actually played on turf. I think none of us picked him last week because we all assumed he wasn't going to play, and then he comes out this week and says, "Oh no, I'm actually good. I'm going to play on turf." It's really just last year with my knee, but now I'm good. So he's a little bit more
that's
available.
DP money right there.
And he did not earn the penalty. At least he wasn't credited in fantasy with earning the penalty this week. He earned both penalties last week.
Okay.
And you can get by with that stuff on TAM, but that's not what a DP can do. Jessup, any more takeaways from you?
Well, the only one that is probably not as interesting to everyone outside of Cincinnati, but I pay close attention to FC Cincinnati. And one of the things I've been watching a lot this year is how they're using Saif. And I really have been hopeful that he's going to come into the team and add a little bit more of that offensive element that a lot of people preseason weren't sure that FCC would have, being sort of a defensive setup and having so many defensive midfielders and defensive players. But after watching several matches, I'm kind of confused as a layman how Saif fits into this system, into this team. First, he's playing on the wide spots in the midfield, almost like a winger. And he just doesn't seem to have enough speed. And every time he would get the ball, he would dart inside. I mean, he really looks like the sort of controlling central midfielder for like a 4-3-3 system, where he's kind of directing the play and a good assist machine, good passing, good decisions, on the ball, but not really fast and not a clinical finisher that you would have up top. Same thing happened this weekend. They moved him from a wing actually up to a second striker. And again, not a really big guy that you would think would be like a target forward, and also not super fast, or at least, didn't pass my eye test for having the speed you would want to get in behind defenders. So I think Coach Koch knows a lot more about soccer than I do, but I am a little confused where they're going right now, and I think this team is still kind of mixing and matching, trying to figure out their best formation after they lost Adi.
And that's the big takeaway, I think, for people is without Adi, Cincinnati, they're not struggling, but they haven't settled quite into that breakaway counterattacking as we maybe had hoped they would. Maddox and Manny should be able to use some speed to burn people, and they had some great chances against Sporting Kansas City where that speed was displayed. They just couldn't finish it up a lot without that big point man. And I think you nailed it, that Saif and it's Manny Kakuta, that it seems like they both should be playing in the middle, but only one of them can play in the middle, and the team doesn't know what to do with that because we still don't have a true playmaker. And I will also say he falls down a lot.
He did spend a lot of time on the ground. I noticed that.
He just falls down a lot. Blayne, Mike, what do you guys want to add?
One that I saw, and I think the numbers kind of played in their favor a little bit. The 2-2 game between Chicago and Toronto. One of the things that I know a lot of people have said at the start of the season, they started off 3-0, but that was Philly, New England, and New York City. Not the strongest teams in the Eastern Conference. To walk away 3-0 there, yes, they were scoring goals, but they gave up 2 to New England, who had struggled to put goals on. Now they've got a draw against Chicago. Chicago has not been the lights-out team that we would expect. Through this next stretch of games that they've got coming up, they've got Seattle. They're going to Seattle, then they've got a home game against Minnesota. Portland, which should be a good one, and then you go to Orlando. Don't look for the same level of production and the same defensive presence that you've had. De Leon has been good, but he's been riding a couple of good attacking presences so far. Those clean sheets are probably going to dry up, so just watch that one. Chicago's not the strongest team, and this was a 2-2 game. Look for them to get shelled a little bit in these next couple of games because they're going to run into some heavy offensive teams.
Mike, anything else?
I'm actually going to push back a little bit on the Chicago. Chicago's had a pretty rough schedule. They've played Galaxy in LA. They had a draw to Orlando at home, which is pretty inexcusable. But then they played Seattle, the Red Bulls, which they won, and then at Toronto. And if we've looked at CJ Sapong, he's actually the 9th best forward in total points overall in the game, and that's not with an extra game, unlike Vela. And I'll talk about him a little bit more later as far as their matchup this week. But I think there's actually some decent value in Chicago. I think people were sleeping on them a little bit, and they still haven't integrated Gaetan. I think that's their new guy. I don't know how to say his name. But
that's how the podcast works.
That's how the podcast works. See, if I didn't mispronounce it, why would you even be here? There's no point for me. I'm not giving you good fantasy advice. You might as well just hear fun mispronunciations of names. But I think there is some value on Chicago.
Great. I think that's a good chunk for the review of round 6. Let's move on to our housekeeping because this is a lot of stuff I want to go over with everybody. So number one thing on the radar for every fantasy manager this week, games start Tuesday. If you're listening to this podcast late on Monday, that's tomorrow. If you're listening to it Tuesday, it's today. Don't get caught off guard. April 9th, 8 o'clock p.m. with DC versus Montreal, the round starts. Thank goodness we have rolling transfers because we can still keep making trades if you do miss it. But there's another game on Wednesday, April 10th at 9 o'clock, Colorado versus Seattle. Big double game week is what we've got here, guys. So make sure you get your team set if you want to take the most advantage of it. Speaking of the double game week, the teams already set them. Colorado, DC United, Montreal, and Seattle. Those are the teams that are going to get 2 games this week. We had a question coming from Reddit asking us for a little bit more information about the double game weeks, and it's the perfect time to do it because it's our first one. the next 8 rounds, like I already said, don't listen to Mike's just depression. The next 8 rounds are going to be fantastic for generating points. We have 8 rounds of double game weeks. I think it's 8 rounds. It's massive chunk of double game weeks as we're leading into the Gold Cup. That's when players are going to start leaving. But this is a great time to make up points, to try to hold back your lead. Things are going to change. So don't give up. This is the fun of the MLS game. For double game week, it just simply means that most teams, or a lot of teams, everyone except Portland actually, is going to have a double game sometime over this next stretch. They'll play 2 games within the week, and you'll get points from both games. So for a lot of people, it's going to double up their score, and that's going to be fantastic. But that's not how it works, because because MLS, there will be rotations. It always happens. Some players are going to rotate more than others, and the rule of thumb, you could sort of say, is more defensive players tend to rotate less. So if you're looking at goalkeepers, at defenders, even some of the D-mids who can actually shine during this time, those guys are going to get closer to 180 minutes than some of the forwards, some of the midfielders who coaches are going to want to rest some legs. Some of these teams, guys, 2 teams are going to be playing 9 games over the next 6 weeks, and a lot of them are going to be playing 8 games. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of travel. So that's how it works. Just keep an eye out on who plays first so you can take advantage of those double points and don't get caught off guard. Sometimes I think maybe one of these rounds we're going to have a bye week, but everybody's playing for most of them. So you don't have any bye teams to get easy switcheroos. That's the way it is this week. I will give you some suggestions, though. The New York Red Bulls had the Sunday game. That's the last game. They've got a goalkeeper and a defender that have 4.0 value. Sporting Kansas City, who they're playing, has a goalkeeper, defender, and a forward who have 4.0 as their price. And then if you're looking for 4.0 midfielders, the game before that, the last game on Saturday, Cincinnati and LAFC both have 4.0 midfielders, but sometimes they do get some play time. So just be careful with that. But there are 4.0 options late in the round. I prefer late round switcheroos, so I have plenty of time to adjust things if I want to. But those are your options this week. Now let's get on to injuries and, of course, cards. Mike.
All right. Obviously, the cards are the big ones. Wayne Rooney has a red card. Maxi Urruti also has a red card. So those are your double game week players. I don't know if Rooney's will be extended or not. I saw some concern about that. I don't think Urruti's was. Urruti's was just a regular red card. So he'll probably be back for the second game against Columbus for Montreal. And then the other big issue injury-wise for the double game weeks, we talked about Rudy Diaz missing. I haven't seen an update on his status, but Nacho Piatti is going to be out for both games, according to their coach. So that's a big loss because he'd probably be first in our lineups otherwise. I don't know of any other big injuries for the double game week teams. Also, I mean, for other red cards like Menchien for New England, he had a red card. I don't think that's going to affect a whole lot of picks this week. But, yeah, I mean, so other than those, it's pretty much just going to be rotation issues. We don't know Quintero's status for Minnesota. I think he'll play. I think he was just being on the cautious side because they have their big home opener this week. But we'll have to see about that. That's the only other big name who's kind of on the injury list.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. Anybody have anything to add to that? No? All right, well, let's get on to our ESPN Plus Round 7 preview. If you haven't checked out ESPN Plus yet, head over to MLSFantasyBoss.com right now. We've got a link in the sidebar for how you can start your free 7-day trial. It's been a super convenient way I found to be able to watch games that are coming through ESPN Plus, streaming on any device on your computer or on your phone. And they've got a great new deal now with U.S. Open Cup. So it's going to be a great source for a lot of domestic soccer. Check it out, $5 a month over at MLS Fantasy Boss. But now let's get on to a Round 7 preview, starting with keepers, defenders, and shutouts. Probably going to be focusing on a lot of double game week guys here, but don't forget those single game week players. So let's kick this all off, Blayne.
Yeah, so I don't know what Reed's talking about. Don't talk about any single game week players on your defense here.
I didn't say specifically on defense. I just a general note to not forget to talk about single game week players. We've had people ask about that through Reddit. So
no, I know. And they're always your switcheroo candidates that you've got to look for on the single game weeks. I started off looking at this, and I started picking. I always build from the front back, so the back end gets a little different. Currently, I need to bring in a DC defender, but because I like their clean sheet chances this week, but at the cost and everything, it's just been really tough. I'm going to wait and see the lineup. I know Mora's out, and I don't remember who's been starting for him, and I don't know that he's been playing too well in that time. So a little nervous there. But so who I've got, the two standout names I've got are Bush and Hoiberry. And those might be odd picks this week, but Bush is your cheapest double game week keeper at 5.6. And you can't underestimate just having a double game week keeper. He should get the 4 points plus some saves. I like the style that he's going to be playing against. He should pick up a lot of bonus points here. So while he may not have the clean sheet chances, I think at 5.6 he's going to pay off on points and get a lot of those save points coming in. And then Hoiberry is $4 million again. He's probably one of those guys that now that we know that the price floor goes below 4 million, even though their actual value never goes below 4 million. He's probably one of those guys that's somewhere in the 3 million range with a couple of own goals and a red card. I mean, he had just not been playing well. But at 4 million, if he goes 2 games and snags a couple of bonus points, I can't really complain about that. And that gives me a whole lot of money to look at premium double game week players up front. So those are kind of my two standouts there. Currently, I've got Keehee and Diallo in as other players. I'm probably going to try to work in one DC defender instead of Diallo. And I think Keehee is the cheapest Seattle defender you can get right now. And I wanted that Seattle coverage this week.
Mike?
Yeah, we actually have some similar picks, even though I thought I was going weird. I have Evan Bush. I think Hamid probably has the best clean sheet chances with DC. But part of my reasoning is looking at the Montreal DC game in the first game. No Piatti, no Rooney, no Rudy. That could be a very ugly 0-0 game. So I kind of like defenders from either side of there. And then I have a little bit of a tip for Bush because I think Columbus has been a little overachieving as far as expected goals and the chances they're creating. So I think that on the road, especially in Montreal's home opener, because that is their home opener, it's the first time they've played at home because, obviously the cold in Montreal. So I think they'll have a pretty decent opportunity for a clean sheet, and he's cheap. He allows me to do stuff elsewhere. And the rest of the good defenses outside of Colorado is really expensive. So I have Keehee as the cheapest Seattle defender. I also have Birnbaum, mostly because DC defenders got wrecked. I wouldn't mind if you going with Brilliant, but I had the extra money, so I upgraded to Birnbaum. On the bench, I have McCann. He's the one who subbed in for Mora. He hasn't played 90 minutes yet, though, so he's been kind of subbed in and out. I think the second sub is at least something to do with the red card, trying to get some more forwards to try to catch up. But, I mean, he hasn't been doing all that well, but he's 4.8, so he's a cheap way to get on the bench. If he hits a clean sheet, more power to me. And then I have Rosenberry, 4.3. He's only averaging 2 million, but, again, cheap on the bench. If something weird happens with Colorado and they manage to keep a clean sheet at home, especially if Seattle rotates a lot midweek, which I don't think is a crazy possibility, I'll get some cheap points that way.
Jessup.
Yeah, so I started with the sort of underlying assumption that we've got two of the best defenses in a double game week here. We've got DC United, who have given up a total of 5 goals. 4 of them were this week. So
against one of the best offenses.
Yeah, if we ignore the LAFC drubbing that they just took, they still have been incredibly stout. And Seattle's defense has actually 3, has the fewest goals on the season. So I'm looking heavily at those two teams for defense. Now, that gave me either Hamid or Fry as the two keepers that I would want if I could fit everything else in to my lineup. With Seattle, they also, not only do they have a good defense, they've got 2 of the best attacking defenders, in my opinion, on their team. And so if they don't keep a clean sheet, I love the chances of Leerdam or Smith actually getting an assist or really good bonus points from all their attacking potential. So I wanted both of them in my team, and I also want some other Seattle players up front. So that means I went with Hamid at goal so that I could get both those attacking defenders for Seattle in my back line. I went with Bryant, I suppose, for the same reasons that Mike talked about. Do like that DC defense, like especially against Montreal, who's just got no one but tighter left, in the attack. And then I'm taking a chance on Lovitz. He's on my bench in a switcheroo. Same concern. Montreal has not been fantastic on defense, but he also is the one who had the assist for the one fluky goal that Montreal scored in that 7-1 against SKC. So I think Lovitz does have a little bit of attacking potential. Might get some bonus points even if they don't keep it clean. So those are my four defenders: Bryant, Leardom, Smith, and Lovitz, with Hamid as my first goalkeeper.
Yeah, great picks. So talking about single game week players, I will say do not have a single game week goalkeeper. There's absolutely no point. Blayne hit the nail right on the head right there, almost hit the goal on the head. Hit the nail right on the head. Even if someone like Bush, you're going to get likely 2 points per game for at least us playing. You're probably going to get at least one more bonus point from recoveries or something during those games, maybe saves. So you're looking at sort of a reasonable floor for the player of about 6 points. And you'll probably find that in a single game week player anyway, maybe even a little bit better than a guy who gives up a goal and maybe comes away with only 2 or 3 points. So with a chance of a shutout or more blocks from shots, you're just better off having a double game week player. Important to note, those stats don't add up. So they're not going to give you 1 score after 2 weeks. You'll get 2 scores, so you don't add up those shots and blocks and everything right there. So do not get a single game week keeper. I think, though, you could consider some single game week defenders right here. And the team that I'm going to say is LAFC if you want. And that is simply because of Stephen Beitashour. He is a very aggressive midfielder. He's come away with some offensive points in all of his seasons. So he's not a guy who's just randomly getting a point here or there. This year he's already gotten a goal, maybe an assist as well. I just got his stats loaded up. He got a goal and assist against San Jose. He got 10 points against DC United for the shutout right there. But he's a guy who puts crosses in and he'll make those runs. Against FC Cincinnati, you could see when Sporting Kansas City added in their midfielders who started doing more crossing, making more runs. It really ran that defense ragged. They didn't know how to react to that. And that's the kind of player I think Stephen Beitashour is, that he could take advantage of that. So if you're looking for a single game week defender, I think he's a solid option right there. Otherwise, you guys have listed a lot of great players. I'm looking at all those. I might be running 2. I'm looking at Hamid myself, so I might be looking at 2 DC, 2 Seattle players. I'm keeping an eye on McCann, Mike, since you mentioned him. If he does start, I will probably downgrade Bryant to McCann so that I can then add in a second Seattle defender, because I would value Seattle defenders over Beitashour in that head-to-head match right there. Let's move on to midfield, guys. Mike, who are you considering?
Midfield, I think, is where you have a lot of choices this week. I think Tyder's probably a must-have. He's been Montreal's most consistent player. I also have Roldan. His consistency has been really, really good. At 9.3, he's not a bad price point. I have Ladero as well. I don't know if he'll be rotated or not. That's a lineup I'm going to check. But I think he has the highest ceiling out of any of the players this week, since Rooney is going to be out for the first game, and we don't know Rui Diaz's status. So that's kind of the core. Also have Lucho Acosta. My main thinking on Acosta is that because he's had kind of a middling start this season, that most people aren't going to have him, and so I'm going to go differential and pick him up. I think probably Areola is your better chance, but as far as consistency is concerned, and he's a little cheaper, but I'm just going to Acosta just to do something a little bit different. And then on the bench, as part of the last part of my switcher, I have Bassett from Colorado. 5.4 midfielder, but he's gotten like 4 and 5 points whenever he starts 90 minutes. Yeah, he's 5, 3, and 11 in his past few games. He scored and got an assist in the last game. So price rise and 5.4, take a shot, see if something happens if they're able to score. So I don't think that's a bad opportunity coming off the bench.
Jessup.
Yeah, I struggle with DC because if I'm going to have Hamid and a defender, that only gives me one more player. I would love to have both Moreno, who is actually my pick, and Luciano Acosta. I think I like that pick. But I like the safer option of Moreno. He's cheaper, which gives me more budget elsewhere. And, defensive midfielders, and he's, I think, a bit more attacking than your typical defensive midfielder. He's more of a box-to-box midfielder. So his floor is pretty high. He gets a lot of bonus points, and having 2 of those games, I like that reliability. I have Ladero for all the reasons Mike said. Also tighter, same reason. He's the only attacking piece left in Montreal for this week. So I'm assuming he's going to do a lot with the ball. And then I'm a little on the fence here with this 4th midfielder. Right now I've got Benny Feilhaber. He hasn't done a lot this year, but he has been actually lining up, according to the stats, pretty far forward, almost an attacking midfielder and not quite playing a defensive midfielder. Hasn't produced a lot, but Colorado is a little attacking. It's 2 games at home, kind of hoping that he, does a little bit more this week. But the other 2 that I'm considering in that same spot are Bassett. I noted Mike made a good recommendation there. Very cheap and he's got some good numbers. And Mosqueda. Now, I think he plays more like a winger role, so if he's not scoring a goal or getting an assist, he might rack up the bonus points. But, trying to figure out what would be a really good, cheaper Colorado midfielder in that 4th midfielder spot.
Blayne.
Yes, I think you guys have hit on everybody that's on my list, so I'll just run them down really quick. I've got Ladero, Acosta, Moreno, Roldan, and Titer. I think this is a week you just really load up on the heavy hitters. Moreno and Roldan both have that really high floor that you look for in a double game week. Both of them have the potential to get into the attack. I mean, Roldan had the assist this week, and I think was the 2nd best midfielder for Seattle. Moreno has, I think, the best average of all the DC midfielders right now, and maybe the best average of any of the DC attacking players, even better than Rooney's at this point. So that's really hard to pass up on a double game week, because if they even come close to their average for those 2 guys, for Moreno and Roldan.
Thank you for giving her what she wants. Thank you.
Go. Sorry about that. Lily, okay, so long story short, Lily does not want to sleep. And she was almost asleep on me, but she is standing up here watching us podcast. And Sarah is frustrated because Lily won't sleep because I'm not in there.
Oh.
So, anyway, she's having fun with me right now, and Sarah is not the happiest person about it.
Well, I appreciate your commitment to the fans and everyone.
I love you all.
You guys have said a lot of the top players there. I agree with you, Jessup and Blayne. I do like Moreno over with DC United. I was talking to our friend Jason Hicks, who is in the Patreon and is a DC fan, and I was asking him the question that I know is on a lot of people's minds, and that is, what happens without Rooney? People are looking at Quincy Amarikwa as a potential option to jump in there, but people are also just wondering what happens. And let me load up the Twitter here real quick. And Jason did say that Quincy is an option that people might want to look at. He's a forward, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. But he was also saying Segura is someone who lined up, and that also he would expect to see Zoltan in there. So Steiber is someone who might pop in. He's at a midfielder. So those are some other options you might look at. But I like Moreno for all those reasons you guys are talking about. D-mids in general really shine during a double game week just because of those bonus points that these guys already talked about. Now, I'm a little strapped for cash on my team, and I put a lot of that cash into my front line. So I actually have right now in my lineup for that more defensive player. They also have a Zira, and I love a Zira. He was at Colorado simply for his bonus points generation. So that's what I may go with. I might try to move some things around and see if I can afford Titer getting there because he is clearly the option. But I really don't know if I like Montreal this round just because of having to play against DC. Then their first home game is against Columbus, who's been doing pretty well. So I'm not sure if Colorado or if Montreal is definitely the best pick. Otherwise, if you're looking for a single game week team, I think Dallas is still a great go-to. They're going up against Portland, which, as we already talked about, been horrid. Paxton Pomacall, 8.2, only got 3 points last week, but he's been doing great things all year. I think he's a solid single game week pick if that's someone who you want to go with. Otherwise, I think you can look at in LAFC, maybe even LA Galaxy as someone back at home that might be
do you have one single game week since I got cut off. If you're looking for that cheaper option or just that weird switcheroo that's not going to cost you a lot, Memo Rodriguez is still really, really cheap, and Houston's at home against San Jose. Houston's been that team in the last couple of years that get lucky, play the roulette wheel on who's going to score. This year, they've kind of been consistent with Memo being involved in a lot of their goals so far, or being one of their leading goal scorers. I think he is the leading goal scorer at this point. That's hard to pass up at these prices because at worst, as a switcheroo, as the back end of a switcheroo, you're not out a ton of money. I think I don't have him up, so I don't know what he costs at the moment. But you're talking under $6 million. That's $2 million above the scrub.
Yeah, no, he's been great.
Yeah, so definitely have him on your radar if you're looking for a bench spotter. If you've just got some extra cash after you've got all your double game weeks and can't really run an auto-roo, he's an auto-roo candidate right there. Throw him in against somebody else. I mean, you should have enough money at this point to try to get him in.
Yeah, no, that's a great call. Let's move on to our forwards now. Jessup, kick us off here.
This was by far the hardest one for me. Probably a lot of the listeners. You've got the best obvious forwards on red cards here. Rooney's out. And then, of course, Rudy is also out. So I have Kamara as my first forward. He's the only double game week forward that I can even really consider. I didn't see anyone else that I was really sure would even start 2 matches, let alone anybody that had a good chance of doing well. Colorado has been more attacking. They've been absolutely horrible on defense. And we're going back here, but I will note there wasn't a lot of praise about the Colorado defenders when we're talking about defenders, but attacking-wise, they have been doing okay. And so I'm hoping with a double game week, Kamara might come away with something. Despite the really tough matchups that he's got at home. The other one might be my only single game week player on my first draft here, and that's Vela. I was on the fence about Vela, but I was talking to Blayne a little bit before the podcast, and I think he's got me turned around. The 1 week I did not take Vela last week, I regretted it. So maybe I'll just go ahead and plug in a single game week player this week. He'll be my second forward.
Blayne, who do you got?
Yeah, so I was in the same boat Jessup was, and we talked about this before the show a little bit. And I hit that nice little checkbox in there, show all double game week players. And I looked at it and go, Rooney, red card. Rui Diaz is questionable. He's one that's on the radar. Watch that lineup. If he is in the first game, I have a good feeling he goes 120 this week. And I think he's somebody you need to have if he does go both games, just seeing their matchups. And I was like, ooh, Kai Kamara, double home game, but it's 2 of the best defenses in the league. So as soon as I saw those few names pop up, I was like, Vela and Zlatan, no questions. I think you run 2 single game weeks. I think both of them have that better chance. You can run an auto-roo, switcheroo with some of these cheaper options. I mean, Rubio's only 6.8. If you've got the money or want to work it around and bring in a Kamara or something. But I just, with their averages, with the way they've been playing home games against shaky defenses in Cincinnati and Philly, I think you've got to keep these guys on the radar and have at least one of them. I think I'm going to go with both for sure at this point. I know I've got 2 Cincy fans listening to me. I know your defense is good. I know you guys do like to bunker a little bit and can lock these guys down. But just watching Vela and Rossi, and whether it's Diamande or Ramirez play, they are unlocking defenses that like to pack it in behind. If Cincy's going to do one thing, they need to take a page out of Sporting's book and foul them early and foul them often and just try to disrupt that game. I think that's really – I really think that's the only way to shut down this LA team. If you can't outscore them, I think that's one of the few ways you can get through them, because if you just try to bunker and keep the result, they will find a way to unlock you sooner or later. Vela and Rossi are just too much quality at getting this done.
Mike.
All right, so I actually have two new forwards that we haven't talked about. My first pick is CJ Sapong. Vancouver's defense has been pretty much trash. I mean, I think they've kept one clean sheet all year. Most of the I think they have one other game where they've only allowed one. The rest, it's 2 or 3 goals. For all of Chicago's problems, they're at home, and CJ Sapong has been a huge part of them. His scores so far, 7, 7, 8, 3, and 8. So that's 3 goals in his 5 games. And in those other 2 games, he's gotten an assist. Or excuse me, one of the games he got an assist. So I think Sapong is a really good option at 8.7, excuse me. And then my other option is Quintero. Minnesota is going to have a huge opening. And I watched New York City this week. They are trash. They are not going to keep anyone out. And if Quintero is healthy, I think he's going to put up at least a brace. I may captain him over in Ladero this week. That's how much confidence I have in Minnesota over New York City this week.
Wow.
If Quintero doesn't play, that's an easy switch to Vela as far as the price point for me. So that's kind of a setup that I have right now. But yeah, I mean, home opener, that's going to be a packed stadium. You know, it's the first time they're going to have a stadium. There's going to be a lot of excitement. We've seen what that can do in the past with Orlando, FC Cincinnati, this year. We've seen it all through history. When you open a stadium, that's a huge game, huge momentum, and usually a lot of goals for the home team. So, and if that's the case, Quintero is almost certainly going to be involved.
Yeah, that's some great picks. I do want to add right now, I forgot to mention this in the last segment. There was a question about, do we think Ladero is going to play both games? And I went back through 3 previous years for Ladero, and the only time he has not played 90 in both double games is when he either had a toe injury or when he was missing a game because of the international match for a call-up. So I feel pretty confident that we'll see Ladero play both of these games this week. I'm right there with Blayne talking about forwards. I am going with Zlatan and Vela. I went big money right here. I love FC Cincinnati, but I mean, Vela's been unlocking stuff, and I already mentioned Beta Show early on as a potential single game week team. So I think you have 2 great single game week options right here: LA versus Philadelphia, LAFC versus Cincinnati. I think both of these guys can do well, and it's Zlatan back at home with hope he can create more from open field or earn some more PKs. I'm okay with that. That's a forward's job. And when you're looking at the double game week guys, you guys nailed it. Montreal's missing the best bite of its attack. Colorado is going up against some great defenses. DC United is missing the best part of its attack at forward. You have Ruiz potentially coming back for Seattle, but is that something where he immediately plays 90 in both games? Probably not. I would be surprised if maybe he did 60 against Colorado, or maybe if he even comes in at the end for Colorado and just keep him to get some exposure at altitude and not really have him too much running to save him back at home against Toronto, who have been doing better than Colorado. So I could see a split for Ruiz as well, and that just leaves single game week guys. I mean, you could look at Elise if you want to go in that same vein as Memo, as someone who could unlock the San Jose defense. Mike mentioned Quintero already. That's another good look. That's probably where I would leave it as far as single game week guys. I still have some concerns about rotations or just, I mean, you could go with Nemeth if you want to and try to just pound on New York Red Bulls, but it's the last game. If you're waiting that long, you have little options to correct it. So I don't tend to like those games myself. So that's what we're looking at as forwards. That's what I thought. Great guys for this conversation. Let's go on to.
Can I throw out just a question? Yeah. If we're all so down on Montreal's offense, should you fade Tighter this week, or is he just too consistent to fade?
I was the one who didn't have Tighter, and that was because I was down on their offense. But I did go for Kiete or maybe Azira because of the defensive midfielder. I could see them having to withstand a lot of defensive pressure, and that could result in bonus points for them. So that's where my mind is. That does Tighter excel with Rudy and Piatti both gone?
Yeah, I'm with Blayne. Reed. If nothing else, him having the ball as much as he's going to have the ball and trying to do as many things as he's going to try to do and be forced to do, probably. I like his bonus point potential, but also keep in mind, as much as we're so confident that Montreal is not going to have a great week, because MLS, Tyler's going to have two
double hat trick. Yes.
Okay? And the same thing with Colorado, the worst defense in the league, but they got 2 home matches in altitude. How much you want to bet? At least one clean's going to pop up, and I don't have a single one of their defenders. That's why I'm sticking with Tyler for now.
Hey, you got to at least get Axel because he's 4.0. Come on. You can make that work.
Yeah, I might plug him.
All right, let's talk about forwards. Or not forwards. Let's talk about captains. Blayne.
Yeah, it's a toss-up this week, really, between Ladero and Acosta. And it really kind of comes down to who you think or how you think DC is going to play without Rooney. I think that really does boost Acosta this week. I think that's going to bring him to more of the focal point, and the attack's going to have to run through him instead of kind of running to Rooney and a little bit away from Acosta. But it's really hard to argue against Ladero with a home game against what I consider a very weak Toronto defense, and even the road game against Colorado at altitude. Colorado is not the strongest defensive team. Most goals given up in MLS this year. We've talked all about Portland's defensive woes, but Colorado's been even worse. So it's really hard to argue against that for Ladero. So those are the two I'm going to give to Lily. I will have her be picking here soon, and I will get that out on Twitter with who she picks.
Mike?
Ladero if he starts, otherwise Quintero.
Okay. Jessup?
It's going to be Ladero. This is a week where I would love to be brave enough to cap a defender, but I can't do that. I can never bring myself to do that. So it's going to be Ladero.
I am also looking at Ladero. I think you're right. It does kind of come down to Ladero or Acosta. But I tell you, I mean, Vela is a guy who could come up with like a brace and an assist, and that can add up really quick. I mean, I tell you guys, everyone's like, no single game week players. I have never seen a double game week where at least one single game week player did not make it into the best XI. Like it always happens because MLS just the matchups. If it's a good matchup, consider it. Don't just knock it off. I touch on a lot of these tips in my newsletter this week, so subscribe to that over at MLSsoccer.com if you have not already.
And I think Andrew Collard.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say Andrew Collard ran the numbers a few years back, and he found out that double game week players usually get 1.6 times the average. So while that's certainly enough to get them to be more consistently better than single game week players, it's not such a huge advantage to overcome, a player getting a hat trick or a brace usually. So that's something to keep in mind. It's usually not twice their points because they're exhausted on that second game and don't usually do as well.
Well, speaking of, because MLS and the crazy things that happen, we're all, sort of just accepting that LAFC is going to destroy our team, FCC. I also don't have any FCC players in my team, so I agree. However, maybe LAFC will have a lot of empathy and feel sorry for Saif as he falls left and right and falls down over and over on the ground, and maybe they'll just, give up a goal or two to
You never know. You never know. I don't know, but if people do start considering some FC Cincinnati players, there's lots of options there. Don't overlook Danny Cruz. He has quickly become one of my favorite players on the team. He gets involved in so much, but probably not this week. Thank you so much, guys, for those tips. I hope everyone listening found them helpful in making their decisions. Remember, games start on Tuesday. That's all that we have for the show tonight, so let's get on with our plugs. Blayne, I think you're muted right now, so let's go with Mike first.
Nothing different this week.
Jessup.
I gave a plug to my wife last year when I was on the pod, and I made her listen to the entire pod just so she could hear me give a shout out to her. She did not appreciate that. She's not a huge soccer fan, but I'm going to give a shout out to my wife, and especially this week because I'm sort of fanatical about trying to watch real-time scores and plug in, my lineup, make sure all my starters are starting and do my switcheroos. But we'll be traveling to Europe on vacation this Saturday. So I'm going to be in airports trying to get on the internet just to make sure my MLS fantasy team is up to date. Sorry, sweetie.
We could do a fun supplementary podcast sometime about if you record yourself trying to do this, then we'll put that out there for people to find out how to MLS from abroad. Blayne, what about you? You're still muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
I've got to give a shout out to my wife too. I mean, you guys all heard that little outburst. She lets me do this on Monday nights. Lily is standing here climbing up on some storage containers I have and jumping off on the pillows right now. That's why I have been muted. And this is the first time she's ever done that. So really thankful my wife lets me do this most Monday nights without interruption. Every once in a while I do get an interruption. And she's worth it. So that's going to be my shout out for the week.
Well, now I feel bad. I'm like the shitty husband who didn't shout out his wife.
Well, I will give a shout out to my beautiful wife as well for letting me do this as well, and for getting my awesome hat for those of you in YouTube land to see my MLS Fantasy Insider hat. Of course, you can check out everything that I do over at MLSFantasyBoss.com. We have a lot of articles coming out quick this week. The MLS Fantasy newsletter is still coming out, so if you have not subscribed to that, over at MLSsoccer.com and just search for newsletters. And here's this. You guys, we're getting over 900, sometimes 1,200 listens to this podcast and dozens of views, maybe more than dozens, but a lot of views on YouTube as well. If you're a new player, send me questions. Send those questions in. I want to help out for the newsletter at MLSsoccer.com. So the 900, or for maybe less, the people who are maybe listening to it multiple times, good for you. Send me a question. If you've got them, MLS Fantasy Boss, just email it to me. Send it to me on Twitter, whatever you want to do. And if you're a veteran player, have just some strange question, or there's something you think needs to get pointed out to new players, send me the question, let me know, and I'll get that plugged in the article, and we'll talk about it on the show if we can as well. So check out all that stuff, and don't forget r/FantasyMLS and the amazing supporters over at Patreon. That's MLS Fantasy Insider, the Patreon supporter group. Fantastic guys like Jessup who help out to support this podcast and have a lot of fun doing it. So thank you so much, everyone, and good luck.